I'm a behavior scientist, and in this video here, I will explain the topic of why it's the same people that are defending woke, if you can call it woke and left or whatever, but let's refer to the woke I feel primarily in this video, and why are these the same people that are now defending stuff that happened in the Middle East, right? In this video here, I'm not going to go into and show you any footage, nothing like that, but of course I assume that everyone knows what I'm talking about. But I want to explain something here because I feel it's very important in this video. So I hope you guys like the video, share it or whatever, right? Because this is something I've seen for years, right? And I see people kind of finally awakening to this thing because I guess the supportive side has been so openly abrasive, I suppose, online, right? But what I've seen personally then for the last few days, since of course last weekend, is that a lot of people that I tend to, debate or whatever, right? About Netflix wokeness or video game getting woke or whatever, right? Are the same people now that are defending Hamas. Secondly, in this video, I'll explain to you why anti-Semitism and dislike or hatred then for Japanese people, or generally speaking, East Asian culture, so mostly in Japan, Korea, and China, are very, very similar, and why, again, then, you basically see this as a trend where if someone is, openly anti-Semite on Twitter or whatever, they usually also dislikes, anime or whatever. And it really is, very obvious behavioral trend here, and it's very easy actually to explain why. So, if you like the video, please subscribe, press the like button, and let's get into it. That are defending this stuff are the same people, literally. The same person that wrote a comment 2 weeks ago saying that Nodiko was always black is now saying that, well, Hamas or, yeah. This here is Yamato. It's a perfect example of the woke hatred for Japanese culture. I'm not going to bore details. I made videos about this before, but very briefly explaining it. It's a tomboy character who has, talks like a man or whatever. Doesn't really do that. But basically, in the Japanese cultural sense, she's a tomboy, right? But the woke, of course, wants to be trans or whatever. And my general point, of course, is that these people that are hating on Yamato for the whole woke and so on are the same people now then, right? Literally the same accounts I've seen for years, they're hating on this character, are the same people that are defending Hamas. But okay, let's talk about my behavioral standpoint then. Okay, why is this happening? And, why are these people doing the same thing and so on? There are some different points to this, right? But the number one biggest factor and biggest point is what I call Tabula Rasa, Blank Slate theory. So the left, yes, being especially, of course, the further left you are obsessed with the concept that everyone is just born as a white paper, right? And it happens to you is purely the environment's fault, right? So this, of course, is a discussion between nurture, which is nature, and you are cray if you think there's either only one of them. That doesn't make any sense. Of course, it's both. People are born with certain traits, and then they are somewhat changed and that by their environment, right? To believe there's only one of them makes zero sense. And I will say this thing. This video is, of course, apolitical as I can be here, but it certainly is a very clear behavior difference between the left and the right here. So right people usually believe in both and definitely favor nurture, right? But still both, right? Because, the right still believes that based on different laws and so on, right? So they are not purely just, they also believe in nurture, right? But the left, especially as I mentioned, the further left you go, the wokeness increases, right? The further woke you are, the more do they believe in purely nurture. That makes no sense. Why would it be like that? Why would it be that people are born and it's purely just... It doesn't make any sense. But the result of that is that the woke people then, of course, tend to believe that it's purely only the society's fault, right? It's nothing that you ever do actually matters. And I guess, well, I grew up as a kid being a big Spider-Man fan, right? With great power comes great possibility. I have never liked that notion. I'm from Sweden, and Swedes are obsessed with the concept of socioeconomical factors. So for my whole life, right, Sweden has an increased crime rate, right? And now it's skyrocketing. You might see the news. It's very, very, very big right now, right? What happens in Sweden for the last 1 or 2 years, I don't know exactly, but it's increasing every day, right? It's massively increasing. And for all the years in Sweden, they've always only blamed it on the whole Tabula Rasa. There's no one's fault. These people are just, they're born in bad neighborhoods and it's bad, right? Which of course doesn't make any actual realistic sense, but that's what they always say, right? Now, how does this come back to Israel and Japan? Well, the thing is that the Jewish culture is very successful, right? Jewish people tend to get good jobs, right? Tend to be doctors, tend to be engineers, and so on, right? So the Jewish people are basically a massive anti-counter argument against the whole concept of only nurture, right? Because obviously World War II and the Holocaust is the worst thing to ever happen, right? But what you have to understand is that Jewish people has of course had issues for thousands of years, right? They have been mistreated in every country, right? Forever basically. And what that means is that Jewish people supposedly, right, should probably be really bad. I mean, in a macro level, right? They should be poor, they should have bad education and so on, because, they've always been in bad neighborhoods, they've always been, out in the sky and so on. Basically, they always had very bad environment around them, right, in the general sense. However, Jewish culture and the Jewish people, right, has basically always been successful and, rich and so on. Again, of course, some Jewish people do crime too. I'm talking about the macro level, right? Macro level. Most Jewish people have higher education than the average person of the country, so on. So they have always basically succeeded, even though, of course, they've been in bad environments. So obviously, Jewish culture is a massive counter, right, to what the left, especially the far left, believes in. Because, they succeed even if they are like that, right? So how is that similar to Japan? And speaking, East Asia, right, China and Korea and so on. Well, obviously, they are also quite successful. You probably see in the Harvard thing how Harvard is like, well, we're getting too many East Asians here, too many Japanese people here. We gotta, get rid of all the Asians, right? Yeah, there's too much stuff. They're too good at school and so on, right? So obviously, Japanese people, for example, are quite successful, right? In, for example, in America, but also in Sweden and so on. So in the Sweden statistics from the Bureau, crime statistic of before they start doing it, what you could see is that people living in Sweden, right, like poor neighbors or whatever. So if you take a Japanese man living in a poor neighborhood in Sweden, he is less likely to commit crime than a white man born in Sweden and having the whole so on, right? And a Jewish man also is less likely, and both of them, of course, more likely to have a higher education growing up in Sweden in the poor neighborhood than the Swedish person has, right? So to live in this, I would say, this completely dissonance from reality, right? That culture doesn't matter. Of course it does. Culture matters immensely, right? Because it is one thing you can see, the likelihood of a person growing up and getting a good education is based on how the parents, of course, give them, an insight on the value of education, right? And obviously it's a meme, right? That, the tiger mommy, the Asian dad, and of course the Jewish parent as well. It's a meme, right? That these people make their kids like doctor or engineer yet, son, right? That's kind of a meme, right? But it is the truth, of course. East Asian cultures and Jewish culture is the cultures that do push highest for education, right? Which of course again then means that these random people living in bad neighborhoods in Sweden and America and so on, and or immigrants or whatever, they actually do succeed better even than the native population in these countries, right? So they are very much hated, right? Honestly, by the left, and this is the biggest factor, right? Because they succeed where the left will claim they should fail, right? And as a country, Israel, of course, is located in a situation that's very bad, right, from a geopolitical situation. Yet they're obviously the most progressive and functional country in the region. That, of course, also makes the left angry at them, right? Generally speaking here, regardless of what they actually do with the whole thing, because they're like, well, that country is quite successful, but they shouldn't be, right? Because environment-wise, shouldn't be. So That's the biggest factor that you have to really understand, right? But of course there are more reasons why, so let's go into it. Now the second reason why is construction stuff, right? So what I mean is that it's much easier to destroy a statue than to actually build a statue, right? It would be much easier for me to break this figure here, right, than to actually make it myself. To make this figure, I need to understand how to actually mold the figure, right? I need to get the colors, I need to get the certain different objects, I need to get... It's obviously a much more complicated job for me to be able to build this simple figure here, right, than to actually just snap it or break it or, you know, throw it away, right? It is much easier to destroy something than to actually make it, right? And if you take that from a control standpoint, it is much easier to, like, for example, break a pipe in a sewer system than can construct a sewer system, right? It's actually much more complicated to build a city, you know, with functional water, electricity, the roads, and all this stuff, right? Think about how hard it is in all the essence, right, to build like a functional country in general than to just destroy it, right? And it really is. And just like at a very simplistic level, think about building a cart, okay? To build a cart, we need to construct at least 2 wheels, right? If you're gonna be one of them to pull, you have like a puller thing. You need to have some kind of box to have it in. You need to build that box, or have some objects or branches. Or it obviously takes a lot of effort and skill, even to build a cart. Even if it's quite simplistic to build, right? But to construct that takes time and technique, material, and all this stuff. But if you do not break it, you just grab that cart and just throw it, right? Or you slam it on the ground or whatever. Or take a stick that, you know, that is tremendously much easier, right? It is always much easier to break stuff than to build stuff, right? And that is also a typical thing that the left, of course, portrays, right? The left doesn't want to construct stuff. The left wants to rebuild and destroy stuff, right? If you take it from a historical aspect, you know, Marx and so on, right? It's always been for the revolutionary, right? It's more about flipping the current society rather than constructing your own society. You want to, you know, flip the current society, right? If you now take that into nerdiness, then let's look at One Piece sales numbers. So again, there's lots of nerd videos here, but for context, right? One Piece is the most sold manga of all time, and has also sold more, I believe, than any comic book. 500 million copies. Okay, that's crazy. How easy is it to write that today, you know? Even if I spent my whole life from today to write my own books, comic books, whatever, mangas, games, whatever, right? How easy is it for me to, you know, over accomplish that 500 million? Basically impossible in my life, right? Of course, for anyone, it's basically impossible, right? Eventually, something will get bigger, certainly, just by more people being alive and so on as well, right? It's gonna be bigger in the future, 100 years from now. But in the current state, it is basically impossible to overcome this magnitude, right, of selling numbers. So it's obviously much easier for, you know, to be a Netflix writer and just rewrite it, right? You know what I mean? So it really is a very similar, behavior or standpoint, right? Now, of course, I'm not saying that rewriting a Netflix movie or a Netflix TV show is as bad as like destroying a pipe in a city or whatever. It's obviously better that these people will spend time rewriting, vocifying, whatever, Castlevania or something like that, right? And One Piece or whatever, than destroying a city. I mean, obviously. But isn't this a very similar mentality? It is much easier, of course, to get a job as a writer at any of these, you know, adaptations, right? And just rewrite stuff that you want to rewrite than trying to make something by yourself and make it popular, right? One Piece is very known for its massively amount of world building. You know, the author Oda is very creative when it comes to different made up countries and so on, right? So obviously, just by doing this, very similar. Yeah, it's much harder for you yourself to come up with all that world building ideas of different countries and cities and so on, and visual aesthetics, than to just rewrite what is already there, right? And I think that is a very common, you know, behavior that we've seen, right, for the last maybe 30 or so years. How, as you know, the woke infiltrates gaming companies, anime, whatever, comic books, Netflix, all this stuff, right? They infiltrate that, and they rather try to rewrite it in the way they want it, right? And to try to make their own stuff. And that is usually the left way to do stuff, right? It is very similar to Karl Marx, and it's very similar to the current geopolitical ideas as well, right? That it's easier to destroy a statue. It's easier to, destroy a statue than to build your own statue, right? It's much easier. It's the same kind of behavioral strategy, which also means, these woke people will, to some extent, probably more so accept their behavior, right? Because if you're not in this way, I want to create my own stuff, right? If I go anecdotal here, but so for me, it's like, no, I rather build my own city, right? I don't want to take someone else's city. You know what I mean? No, I rather build my own stuff. Yeah, I think that's a difference there in behavior, and that comes us to the next point. So this third point here I call the competitive market, right? Because it is one thing that's very, very clear, typical woke people, is that they cannot compete in the actual current market, right? Whatever that is, if it's stock trading or whatever, right? They cannot compete in the existing environment that is currently right now. So a very common trope is, of course, that women on the woke, right, the far, far lefty women, are conventionally very unattractive, right? And you see like the uglifying of video game characters, making every video game character fat and so on, right? Why? Well, again, first then, the big umbrella point is that these women are not very successful, right, at, again, the current market. So they rather make a new market where they can compete, right? Okay. Or they break down the current market, right? Again, it's similar to typical left, far left ideas, right? That, okay, instead of building my own society, I break the current society and then I rebuild it, right? Because I cannot win in the current situation, right? So there's a very clear correlation, like why does certain women and men, but usually women then, why do they gravitate towards far left? Well, it's because they have no chance, right, to win in the current situation, right? So they want to break it down, right? It's very, very common like that. And of course, if you then also look at this more like a visual standpoint, why am I making all these characters ugly and fat or whatever? Well, if I am changing, right, the current norms, then I can compete because I am like really fat or whatever. So if I make every character really fat, the people think that's how it should be. So I have a bigger chance to win. You know what I mean? That's kind of is the way to look at it. And of course, if you go back to what I mentioned earlier, that these people are so heavily believing in this, Tabula Rasa, Blank Slate, everything is just your environment. It also makes sense, right? Because these people, they actually genuinely believe, because they're wrong, but they believe that men and women or whatever, but they believe that some people actually, don't like slim, attractive women with no fat, because they've only been tricked to believe that because of the games or whatever. Like, they actually genuinely believe that the reason the average person prefers the lady to not be obese isn't because obese is unhealthy. It's because, of course, the games or the movies or whatever have told them to believe that, right? So if they make every game or every movie and so on with a very unattractive female character, very obese and so on, then every man is gonna be like, okay, yeah, actually I want to date an obese woman now because the movies are obese, right? That is again because they actually believe that environment is the only thing that matters, right? Of course, there's zero evidence for that, but that's what they actually believe in. But I hope my video here kind of explains how the mentality works, right? And that does really come back though to Palestine, Israel, and Hamas, right? Because the way these people look at it, and this is how it is, right? And this is not my opinion. This is actually how it is, and I'm sad this is how it is, but this is how it is. The way they look at it, right, is that they truly believe, not all of them, of course, but many of them truly believe that if you're only changed and made by your environment, then they can excuse anything, right? So they're like, well, if you grew up at that place, well, of course, that is not your fault, right? It is the other country's fault because they did this thing, right? So you have no accountability, right? You have no accountability because it's purely whoever made you, right? You know what I mean? It's purely whatever the other country made. And because then to me, there's no surprise, right? that the people that I see, like for example defending Castlevania, are the exact same person as the next day defending Hamas, it makes sense to me because they don't believe that writing or whatever is a skill, right? They don't believe in actual having skills. They just believe in that whatever opportunity you get based on like luck or whatever is the only thing that makes you, there's no skills, right? There's no actual competitiveness. It's only pure luck or whatever. They believe that the only reason this movie is popular is luck, basically, right? It's randomness. They believe that. They will also then believe that, well, if you're born over there or if you grew up in that city or whatever, it's purely luck and randomized, right? There's nothing you can do about it. So of course I can excuse their behavior because it's purely randomized, right? They really believe that. It's like, oh, it's random, right? That's a big reason why for it. And obviously can also then, they can correlate with, why should I build something myself? It's easy to destroy everything in exists, right? But I think the behavior is so clear to me is that, well, yeah, of course they truly believe that everything is just random. So of course then they also believe it's random down there, right? There's nothing you yourself do, right? I don't want to go into the actual, of course, situation, right? Not the kind of video, but I can say a very easy counter argument though to the situation down there in the Middle East is that, well, even if it would be purely socio-economical factors, which of course it isn't, but let's argue that it is for a Steelman argument here. Well, even if it was like that, what they did, of course, is still wrong because from a strategic aspect, it makes no sense, right? And that's why I also really loathe when people compare this to Ukraine, right? Because no, Ukraine is trying to win, right? What they did wasn't trying to win. You don't win by doing that, That's the obviously for me. You don't win by not going for, like I said, I don't want to go into that stuff, but my point is like, no, like you're going for like a music festival. How do you win by doing that? It doesn't benefit you. It brings me to my next point. Competitiveness, right? You look at me, competitiveness, baby, smart, speak, strong. But seriously, right? A very easy way to usually guess if someone is left or right leaning when it comes to how they vote or whatever. The easiest way is to judge or like measure their competitiveness, right? So what you can see is that people that are very competitive, like extremely competitive, they tend to basically always be right-wing, or not necessarily right-wing as in, oh, I'm gonna vote, oh yeah, like super. I mean, like they're not left yet. They're gonna vote for, individual pay and so on, right? But think about it. If you are very competitive, you're probably skilled at something. You can break it down more into that people that are very, very skilled at X. And X can be anything. It can be math. It can be football. It can be soccer. It can be anything. But if you're good at X, right, then you probably imagine that, well, I can probably make money on X. You know what I mean? Like, I can probably be good at X. Like, I'm really good at math. I can probably be a engineer or something. So I can make money, right? Yeah. So basically, everyone that is really good at something, they are almost always against the left, right? Because, well, they can win in the market, right? And people then, like I said, are very competitive. It's a general trait of someone that has high confidence, right? So that also, I think, generally, because obviously I've been observing this, left versus right, woke media, Triggerly-Puff and all this stuff for all the years, right? And it's a very, very clear thing that people on, and of course I'm generalizing it, but people that are very woke, of course, tend to have a very low self-confidence, right? People with very high competitiveness, they tend to be much more than not left, right? And they tend to be skilled at something, so they tend to have high confidence, because they believe in themselves, right? So I think that, I must say this is like 100%, this is all how it is. But at a macro level, absolutely, the people that are woke have, low self-confidence, low competitiveness and so on, right? They don't think they can win and so on, right? And I think it also comes back, again, to the situation in Middle East, because they of course they're going to say that, well, it's obviously Israel's fault, like, these people can't win by themselves, because, basically what I'm talking about is a victim mentality, right? The massive lack of self-confidence and lack of competitiveness means that they're victim mentality themselves, right? So the woke people in the West, in America and Europe and so on, that is excusing the behavior of these, terrible actions, are most doing it in a one way, one factor I suppose, is because they're like, well, victim mentality in them is so empowered, right? So they see these people as victims, right? And obviously, if you're a victim, you can do anything, right? It's not your fault, right? So I think that also is a massive factor. And now, lastly, I want to talk about the comparison between Israel and Japan, right? And it's also interesting victim mentality. So, interesting enough, right? Both these countries are quite isolated, It's an island in East Asia, right? And I believe it's called Shohoku, the isolationist strategy of the Tokugawa period. Correct me if I'm wrong. My Japanese, I think it's called Shohoku. But it's very kind of similar to Israel also being, of course, isolated in its own place, right? So as I mentioned earlier, the culture, obviously, very similar when it comes to education, getting a degree, all that stuff, right? Very, very similar when it comes to the value that this culture believe in education, right? Very, very similar. But otherwise, they're also quite similar in how they have dealt, with Western people in general. Not just the woke, but I mean in general, right? So again, I'm from Sweden. And every time, like a Swedish game company gets critiqued, right? For example, Anita's Christian was at DICE, when I was, so I met her, and so on, right? And when then Anita or whatever, I goes to DICE like, oh, yeah, yes, of course, just please write good Twitter, They are so incredibly caving in, right, to any critique, right? But when the Japanese get critiqued by, the Western or Anita or whatever, right, or people like her, they're like, shut up, yeah. They use like, they're like urusai, yeah. They're like, we don't care, right? Yeah, we don't care. Like in China, it's called baiso. It's by Mandarin, but I believe it's called baiso. When someone is called baiso, means like left liberal, white left. It means like white left, right? So, both not just Japan, but also South Korea and China and so on. They obviously have completely refusing, right, to listen to the wokeness, right? In general, of course, unfortunately, they do sometimes, but most of it they don't do it. And we've seen many actors, right, in Japan, very commonly making fun of the woke people, right? Which of course we non-woke people that are fan of this stuff, we laugh at it. Yeah, we're like, that's a good one. Yeah, they make fun of them all the time, right? So they're basically the critique from the West, especially the left West, but also somewhat the right West as well, right? But has never really worked on Japan, right? Nor China and East Asia. And of course, Israel is very similar, right? They're also like, I don't care about you guys. We don't care about you people. Yeah, they are the same way, right? And we can see it now, of course, when people are complaining now in their counter offense, right? The people are complaining, they're like, we don't care, right? It's a very similar trait how the culture also behaves against outside forces, right? Which I do think honestly comes from a historical aspect that Japan, like I said, has been a very, very isolated place, right? For how long was Shoko? Like 280 years? 280 years roughly speaking. And then afterward led into these wars and then, current Japan. So Japanese society has been very, very isolated. They're very much, anti-foreign, the whole Guardian stuff. Yeah, they're very much like, we are Japan. And obviously if Japan, I mean, I know it very personally, if you move to Japan, right, it's very much like you have to fit into our culture, yeah. If you're gonna move to Japan, right, you have to become Japanese, culture-wise, yeah. You can't come to Japan and behave like, outside, in your own house. I mean, obviously, fine, do whatever you want inside your own building. But if you go out in the city in Japan, you have to, behave like you behave in Japan, You don't accept anything else, right? So think about that. That's how Japan is in general sense. Of course, the Japanese people are like twit-twat. They're like, shut up. Yeah, they don't care, right? Israel, very similar, isolated. In Middle East, sure, but still isolated. Also very similar. If you get inside of our country, this is how the rules are, right? Yeah, very, very stern, very similar cultures, right? In that sense, right? And that also, of course, have bothered the left, right? The woke, but also generally the Western in total, but especially, of course, the woke has been bothered by Japan refusing to ever, go for their ideas, right? Refusing to make, women attractive, whatever. And you can see the similarly Israel refusing to listen to the left, whatever, right? And that's been going on for 40, 50 years, basically. Yeah, it's been going on for many years, right? I mean, in both countries, right? Because, of course, it's much more obvious now, but if you're an old nerd like me, you can see how the Western behavior towards, East Asia has been the same, right? Roughly the last 50, 60 years, right? Something like that. Of course, it's much more clear now, but It's always been like that. So I think that's also a reason why they're very similar, right? Because they're kind of like isolationistic. Like we do what we want over here. Yeah, if you come to us, this is our culture. That is the rules now, right? Yeah, we don't change for you. You change for us, right? Basically, and that is a big similarity, but also of course like a nail in the eye, right? Of the Westerners. Yeah, so can't really change them, right? There's also they very much share, right? But also drives them angry. But anyway, guys, hope you guys did the video. As important topic to talk about, right? Hope you guys have made some understanding here why the Woke are very supportive of this side. But very, very briefly summarize it then, right? The biggest factor again is that the left, especially then the far left, like Woke people, they truly believe that everyone is just born as they are. There's no DNA or whatever. They just believe that you're born and that it's purely environment. Completely focusing on that. Well, it has to be basically society's fault, right? It can't be the criminal's fault. The criminal was probably bullied or something. It's very, very common. So that's the first factor, right? Always blaming society, right? Which, of course, really, to me, explains the very easy way how they can support Hamas, right? Because they're like, well, obviously Hamas is purely created by Israel, so how can you blame them? They have no urgency, so it's purely a randomized magic, right? Basically, right? And then, like I said, right, all the other tropes, I think, kind of come from the general essence of, competitiveness, right? The competitiveness, that they don't want to compete in the current market. They can't compete in the current market, so they want to flip the current market, right? They want to flip it, typically Marxist, right? They want to flip the market. And if you can't flip the market, you rather go into the market like, oh, I'm gonna get a job at Netflix, and I'm gonna write The Witcher or Castlevania or One Piece or whatever. I'm gonna write for those people. I'm gonna rewrite them. Velma is probably the best example because Velma is clearly not supposed to actually be, a Scooby-Doo remake. It's supposed to be something else. And then the authors, they couldn't get that thing to, actually be produced. So they wrote a Velma instead, and they tried to write Velma into what they wanted actually to work on, right? It's very, very common behavior. It's like, I can't get my own idea, and I want to make it, so I try to rewrite someone else to my idea, right? Instead of making your own idea. That all stems from that lack of competitiveness. And then last, as I mentioned, the lack of competitiveness, the lack of merit, means that they actually usually have a lower confidence, right? And the higher confidence you have, the more you're willing to vote for uneven stuff, right? Which to some extent can be bad, right? You should point out, my last thing here. To some extent, obviously, I should say obviously, but to some extent, if you are extremely competitiveness, right? Extremely skilled or whatever, you obviously want the world to be unfair and uneven, because if the world is unfair, that benefits you, right? So that also can, of course, make the world worse. So honestly, just to point out, I do think the society needs to be balanced, right? So, for example, a friend of mine, we were talking about, we were in college, talking about Sweden, right? Sweden having worse and worse education every year. So he was like, I like that, because he's very cynical. This guy is pretty mean, man. So he was like, I like this thing. I like that society is going down in Sweden. I was like, why? Why do you like that the schools are worse or so? I was like, that's a terrible thing to think. He's like, no, listen to me. He's like, I have a son, He's like, I have like a 2-year-old kid, I was like, yeah, okay. I'm gonna raise my son. I'm gonna teach him stuff. I'm gonna educate my son, I will teach him math and so on. I was like, yeah, obviously, yeah. So my son is gonna be way more successful than the older people's kids, right? Because they're gonna grow up in the terrible school system. My son will also be in the same terrible school system, but he will also have me teaching him stuff. Ergo, my son will be way better than the older kids. Ergo, he wins. And I was like, that is true. Yeah, that is true, I guess. Yeah, he was in favor of society being worse. He was like, well, I am obviously gonna, utilize that I will raise my family to be able to, stand atop the rubble. Yeah. I was like, that is also a way to look at it, because he's the perfect example of, and I wouldn't call him, one way, I don't think that the whole left versus right is a good way to look at the world. I think it's a better way to look at it, maybe in the sense I'm talking about it now. Nurture versus nature, competitiveness versus compliance, and so on. It's a better way to look at it, right? But anyway, guys, comment below what do you guys think, subscribe and so on. I hope I broke up some stuff there, but yeah, for me, it's a very, very clear reason why the exact same people that I see defending, I don't know, Mary Jane's looking like 40 years older now, whatever, in the next Spider-Man game. That's the same person that is likely also supporting Hamas. That is the reality, and this is the reason why, right? But anyway, so you guys can have a great day.